forum tonight to order, and I would like to welcome you tonight on behalf of the school committee and also on behalf of the school department to the second of our informational forums. These forums are intended to inform the public of certain new influences that affect our children in seeking their education. As I mentioned last week at our first forum on health education, we used to be able to say that once upon a time, it was easy to educate a child. All you were concerned about was the 3 R's. That, however, was in a perfect world a long time ago, before our children were exposed to new and dangerous influences. Tonight our forum addresses safety and violences in our school. It does not seem long ago that our schools were considered not only safe havens, but set the example for decorum and discipline. But now we find hypodermic needles in our elementary schools. We hear of strangers who stalk our children, and we are confronted with students carrying dangerous weapons for protection or provocation. Times have changed, and with that change has come a new environment. That puts our children at risk from the moment that they leave their homes, and in some instances, prior to leaving. We have become a society that glorifies violence and takes every opportunity to communicate this through the media. Violence is sensationalized and packaged to make it seem attractive and even acceptable. What can we do as a community to enhance our knowledge of this new environment and assist our children and school personnel in dealing with the issue? We must first become more involved in this changing environment. We must become informed of the changing circumstances. We must, however, be careful that our response as a community should always be informed and measured. For although this issue is of great importance, our response to it is of paramount importance. We need to be informed, be knowledgeable, be calm and measured, and most of all, we need to be able to communicate. Let us start to become more informed tonight so we can become part of the solution in the future. We have asked Dr. Mayo to establish these forums. He has brought a number of very distinguished guests who are very involved not only in law enforcement and violence, but most certainly in education. Dr. Mayo, we thank you for your involvement and your staff's involvement, and we look forward to the second forum tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Scully, and welcome everybody to this our second forum. Last week we did discuss the very important health issues with which the schools are contending, and tonight we're pleased to be able to discuss with you the important issue of school safety and violence. Our message in this forum is that violence is a societal issue with which we are contending, in fact, with which the schools must contend. The large majority of students have a strong ethical standard of behavior, and I really want to emphasize that throughout tonight. The schools will be safe as long as the administration, the staff, has the support of the parents, the school committee, and all of the citizens at large. And the end result of this forum, we hope, will be that there will be understanding, there will be support, people will be sensitive to the issue and understand the help that the school department needs. I'm really grateful to our guests for coming out tonight. We have with us Paul Kavanaugh, who is the presiding justice of the Malden District Court, the Honorable Paul Kavanaugh. Thank you for coming tonight. And we also have with us Thomas Riley, who is our district attorney for Middlesex County. Thank you, Tom, for coming tonight. And our Wakefield Police Chief, Chief Doherty, thank you for coming tonight. Our first speaker for the evening will be the Honorable Paul Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mayo and members of the school committee and people of Wakefield, I want to thank you for inviting me. I'll be very brief because I think I do a little bit better probably fielding questions and answers if you have Terry for that. And I can't get involved in any particular cases in any of that we'll discuss, but I will just say this, that the issue of violence in the schools, we just stop and think about it, that this should even be a topic. Stop and think about it. Violence in the schools. Who, as you said, whoever would have thought, I don't want to live in the past, I try not to. But when I graduated high school, if anyone ever said to me, tell me what the schools would be like in 1994, I never would have guessed in Medford High School where I graduated that there would be police cruisers at the bottom of the road as you come down Winthrop Street, scanning the traffic coming in. I never would have believed that there would be police officers standing in the doorways, special police. Nor would I believe that there'd be gun or metal detectors. This was so far-fetched. If I had gone into my wildest dreams, I could never have envisioned that our society would have come to such a situation. We have cases in the Malden court almost on a daily basis involving youngsters who are involved in some kind of trouble at the schools, varying from trespass to carrying guns, to carrying knives, to assault and batteries. And I think the numbers are growing, unfortunately. I've been a judge for 4.5 years, and I hate to say it, I think I'm less wise today than I was 4.5 years ago. 4.5 years ago, I knew all the answers. Today, I know only the questions. I know all the questions. I don't know the answers. Why does a kid carry a gun to school? I've asked them. For protection. From whom? From the kid next door. Yeah, he carries one for protection from that kid over there, and that one carries him over there. I don't know. Where are they getting this? But I will say this, and I've said this for years, my own feelings about guns. I know there are some people who like guns, and that's fine, but I have my feelings. We have glorified the gun in this country so much that it's become such a symbol to everyone. Every one of us adult males in this room, and probably most of the females, at some time when we were growing up, couldn't wait to get our first holster in gun to play Gene Autry or whomever. We had to have a gun when we were a kid. Somewhere along the road, the way I think that translates into our conduct later. Why do we idolize guns? Who told us we should have guns? Who told us the way to resolve problems was through violence and guns, knives? So I don't know. To prove to you, or to bring it to your attention, this may again, I have some far-fetched ideas. I don't know where I get them sometimes, but I was in Medford Parade a few years ago watching the great Medford High School band parade down on a holiday. I don't know what it was. And I'd seen it before, but I never really bothered to think about it. They were leading the Medford Parade, 2 or 3 young women, high school kids, with guns, with, what does a gun, a rifle? What does a rifle, when I thought of it, have to do with the Medford High School band? Why do these young people have to have a rifle to parade? They're not in a band. They're not playing an instrument. So I called the woman up who was head of the band. She said, I was a city councilor at the time, I think. Even if I wasn't, we went into a politics. I said, why do they have to have that rifle? I don't know. I really don't know what the significance is, but I'm not going to get rid of it, she said. So I assume that today even the kids in Medford High School have a rifle. But stop and think about it. I don't know if you do it here in Wakefield, but guns seem to have some deep-rooted symbolism in our country. I don't think a band is a military unit in any sense of the word, not a high school band. It shouldn't be. So the question now comes that having said that the escalation of violence is there, what do we do about it? Everybody wants justice, but everybody wants justice in their own way. We had a very interesting case last year in our court involving a young man who had a gun in the school. We serve Everett, Malden, Melrose, and Wakefield. I won't tell you which community it was, but it was one of those communities. It's a mandatory jail sentence. This kid was going. He was an adult. He wasn't in the juvenile section, I don't believe. He was over there. He was 17. I think he was 18. But the response from the community itself, this kid had never been in any trouble before. He never had a blot on his record. So everybody now said the justice wouldn't be to put this fellow in jail for a year. But if he had had a record, no one would have paid attention to him. He'd be serving time today. So it's all in the eyes of those who, his teachers liked him, the principal liked him. Even the people who were around who were frightened by this gun, the students, nobody wanted him to go away. His truth was, he didn't go. So it's there. I don't know the answers. But I'll tell you, I was telling the chief earlier, I asked a young man up in Lawrence the other day, a juvenile. I was walking over to play basketball with him at the YMCA in between sessions. I took him over there just to talk to him. And on the way over, I said to him, Can you get a gun? This kid 14 to 15 years old. Can I get a gun? He says, of course I can. I said, how much? $60. I said, how long will it take? 5 minutes. 14 to 15-year-old kid. Now that's Lawrence. I know a lot of people saying, he's talking about Lawrence. You wouldn't be here tonight if someone didn't recognize that the problem was encroaching into the good community, quote, good communities. I'll bet you 100 kids at Wakefield High School could get a gun, not in 5 or 10 minutes, take a little longer. If they want to get a gun here, it wouldn't take them very long. And they could do it in Medford, where I come from, in the mall, and in Wakefield, and Everett. It's out there. I don't want to frighten you, but I'm very frightened. I've become a very pessimistic person. The great kids are great, but the numbers of young people who don't have respect for the law, the numbers of young people who think that the way to answer their problems is through violence, the numbers of young people who seem that it's hopeless out there, they have nowhere to go, and turning to leaving school and committing all these acts of aggression and violence, it's amazing, to be very frank. I hope to play my role, and one thing I've done, and maybe you've seen this, and one way that I've tried, and I'm trying now, is we think it's innovative, and I will start with this. I'm in the process now, at the Malden District Court, and Wakefield High School is participating with all the other schools in this district, to have what I call a teen advisory panel. I recognize that I'm not so smart anymore after 4.5 years. I went in with all the answers, now I only have questions. Now I've asked the juveniles, the youngsters, to come to the court, some from every school, and to give us advice when we're dealing with juveniles. Maybe there's some creative people out there. Maybe we should pay attention to them at that level. Maybe we should invite them into our process. Because when adults get tried, they get tried by their peers. When juveniles get tried, they get tried by adult peers. Still the same people who try adults. So we're going to try something new in the Malden District Court. You may be seeing it, you may approve it, you may disapprove. But I have to say that our record to date is not one that I'm, all excited about. Talking about the Malden Court, and just courts in general, the system in general. We're going to be dealing with these cases for a long time to come. They're going to get more and more. And I hope that through the teen panel and any other ideas you people have, I'll be able to deal with the problems of teenage crime, juvenile crime in the schools and out of the schools. It doesn't stop at the boundaries of the school, nor does it stop at the other side. It goes, these same people are committing crimes within the schools and outside. And how do we address it? I hope tonight I can go back to the court with some ideas, but I think one of the answers is to recognize that the juveniles themselves might have the answers. They're the ones who are out there doing it. Let's ask them why. Let's ask them how do we stop it. Let's ask them what they have for ideas. If we don't like their ideas, we can reject them. Once we're afraid of ideas, then we're gone the same way. So let's get some ideas into the young people, and maybe they'll give people like us a helping hand. I'll talk to you later. Questions and answers.
I'm wondering if we could probably change take the microphone and put it right over here on the table for all of you. And I think it's going to go be back and forth. We'll give a better opportunity for the people at home to be. It's really meant for the people viewing this on TV.
Can I take you?
All of the gentlemen tonight work very, very closely with the school department, and again, I'd like to express my gratitude that they're being here tonight. But I'm really not surprised, because they work together as a group, and they work closely with all of us in the school department, and that kind of cooperation really helps and assists us in helping the youngsters and in averting the violence, and in creating programs that are really necessary to make safe schools. Our next speaker, District Attorney Thomas Riley. He's been very, very active with the superintendents, which I know he'll talk about tonight. We do have an alliance. It's a program in which we get together frequently, and he invites our staffs, our principals, and our guidance counselors, and the other key people in the system. And we discuss in depth the many, many topics that have to be addressed if we're going to have safe schools. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you our District Attorney Thomas Riley.
Thank you, Dr. Mayo. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this past Wednesday I was asked to speak before the Commission on the Common Core of Learning. And for those of you who may not be familiar with that commission, it's a commission that's been established by the Department of Education with the mandate to address standards for the Commonwealth for all students, and specifically to set goals as to what each student should know, or what each student should be able to do when they graduate from high school. And when I first received, and they've been having public hearings all over the Commonwealth, when I first received the invitation to speak before the commission, my first reaction, given my legal background, was to think about legal standards and legal goals, what a student should know about our Constitution and our legal system, and what a student should know about their rights and more importantly, their responsibilities as citizens. But the more I thought about it, I realized that whatever legal or whatever standards, whether they apply to the law or whether they apply to math or language skills or science or developing technology, whatever they may be, they would be difficult, if not impossible, to achieve unless some attention, as you're giving it tonight, some serious attention is given to the environment that this learning and this teaching is to take place, in the learning environment. Based upon my experience as district attorney for the past 3 years, that environment is currently at risk due to the problem of violence in the schools. And I base that upon my actual experience. And it goes back, and I'd like to share it with you because I think it can be helpful to put this problem in perspective. I was district attorney just about 2 months. In March of 1991, when a 15-year-old boy was murdered, brutally murdered, on his way home from high school. It was a result of gang violence, and where it took place doesn't really make a difference because it could happen here, it could happen anywhere. I went to that community in the aftermath of the killing, and I spent considerable time there. And what I saw and what I heard and what I experienced, it has had a great impact on me. Students were afraid, teachers as well. Parents of all races and backgrounds were afraid to send their children to school. And I began to see what a crisis we have in education. I mean, how can anyone learn in that environment? How can anyone teach? And how can any parent, or why would any parent, send their children to school in such a climate of fear? And I wish I could tell you that I only had that experience once, that it only happened once. It was an aberration. I cannot. I have witnessed that with varying degrees of seriousness and tragedy in communities throughout Middlesex County, which is the largest county in this state, one of the largest counties in this country. As students, as teachers, as parents, as police, as we all come to grips with students, or young people for that matter, really, that's the better term, who are armed with guns and knives and other dangerous weapons and are prepared to use them. Our approach, or the approach that we have tried, is to convene community-based task forces in several of the communities in Middlesex County where this problem has been a little bit more pronounced. And with those community-based task forces, we bring together educators and teachers and headmasters, guidance counselors, and we bring them together with police, and with probation officers, court personnel, and juvenile justice and social service professionals. Our objective is to make our schools, keep our schools safe, free of drugs, free of weapons, and free of violence. We meet on a regular basis. We meet once a week, and we discuss these problems. And we come up with a plan of action to address these problems. And we combine a no-nonsense prosecution with a blend of violence prevention, everything from mediation techniques, other conflict resolution techniques, to the use of youth advocates to work with at-risk youth. What we have found, and I think it applies to school systems and communities throughout Middlesex County, throughout the state, throughout this country, what we have found is that there is a relatively small group of youngsters who are troubled and they are dangerous. They're troubled through no fault, or their dangerousness comes through no fault of the schools. It comes from their background. They come into the schools this way. And there are a lot of reasons. They've been abused, and more often than not, they come from dysfunctional family backgrounds, very troubling situations. Some have mental disabilities, others have drug and alcohol problems. We have also found, in addition to this smaller group that can be identified, we have found a much larger group, a significantly larger group of youngsters who are at risk of being involved in serious criminal behavior or criminal behavior if their problems are not addressed. Now, many of these youngsters in both categories can be addressed with services that are available in the school setting or without the school setting. By that I mean therapy and counseling that can occur, family services that can occur, diversion programs, creative use of probation. There's a lot of things out there, and they can be very effective, and in many cases they are very effective. It's a case of getting many of these youngsters through this troubled time and giving them the support that they need. However, there are other youngsters, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, who cannot be handled and do not belong in a traditional school setting. Their problems are too deep-seated. And to say that they can be addressed with current services, I don't believe they can. And they can't go back home either, because in many cases there is no home, or there is no home that's going to give them the love and the support that they need. They belong in a residential, long-term setting that is going to give them the support, the education, the self-esteem, the self-discipline, and other services that they need. The other group, and there is a group that we have to recognize, belong in the custody of the criminal justice system. That is where they're going to go, and that is where they belong. It's a small group, but we must face that. Now, this is not a new phenomenon. There have always been youngsters and young people in our communities and in our schools that have been violent. The difference now is that they are younger and they are more dangerous because of weapons, types of weapons that Judge Kavanaugh was talking about. Another difference is that the schools, because of the failure of other institutions, are facing this problem alone. I also believe that we as a society that lack the resolve, or been unable or unwilling, or for one reason or the other have not made the hard types of choices and decisions that we must make if we are to move ahead. Where do we start? I have some suggestions, but I think one of the first is just the recognition that a safe and a secure learning environment is the key to everything that happens in a school, and that we should not allow a small group of youngsters who are dangerous or are interfering with that process interfere with the rights of all the other students who are there to get an education. We must remember as a starting point that this is not an impossible situation. The overwhelming majority of these youngsters, of our youngsters, do not have the types of problems that I was talking about. They're no different than we were. The world is a little crazier for them, but they're no different, and they're doing their best to make it through. So, I think we have to set the environment to let them learn and grow and develop as we were given the opportunity to do. So I think that is the basic premise that we must start with, to make sure that there is a safe and secure learning environment. And it would be a mistake, and I think too often when people deal with this, it would be a mistake to start with the high school. It's far too late at that point if we focus on the high school. Where the focus has to begin is right at the earliest stages, from kindergarten all the way through the elementary schools, the middle schools, and establishing some firm policies when it comes to violent behavior, whether it's the incident that happens in a playground. It's wrong. If it's a fight, it's wrong. And that student's got to be told it's wrong, and there's got to be some consequences. They don't have to be punitive consequences, but something has to happen so that that student realizes that that type of behavior, whether it happens in a playground, in elementary school, is not going to be condoned by that school system. I would also recommend that violence prevention, teaching that violence is wrong, be part of the curriculum from K through 12. And included in that curriculum would be conflict resolution techniques. I mean, as simple as recognizing that, damn it, there's nothing wrong with walking away from something as a solution to a conflict. I would also recommend that there be zero tolerance policies when it comes to possession of weapons, of drugs in a school, or violent behavior in a school, and that those policies be enforced. I would also recommend, and I am going to be recommending this to both the legislature and to the governor. As you well know, you're caught in catch-22 because there are certain youngsters that from what I've seen, and I spend a lot of my time working with schools. I spend 4 days, it'll soon be 5 mornings a week in these community-based task forces. There are certain youngsters that simply do not belong in a traditional school setting. And everyone's caught in a catch-22 now because of the tremendous cost in putting them in alternative settings. A town or a city can go bankrupt with that. You don't simply have the resources and money. So you do the best you can to have alternative types of settings. Some work, some don't. I believe it should be the state's responsibility to set up, and I'm not talking boot camps, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about residential, long-term residential settings where these youngsters who are not yet at the point where the criminal justice system needs to take custody of them are at a position that perhaps if they're taken out of the community, away from the situations that they're in, and away from the environment, particularly the home that they're in, can get the services, the education, the self-esteem, and the discipline that I was talking about. But that's simply something that most communities are simply cannot afford. And if they can't afford it, they can't afford it too often. The costs are prohibitive. I do believe that the state should put the monies into those services and pay for it. And it would be a very good investment of the state's monies when you contrast that or compare it with the cost of incarcerating someone for a long period of time in an institutional setting. But that being said, that there are youngsters that can be addressed within the school. There are youngsters that should be in a residential setting. We should also recognize that there are youngsters that cannot be helped. They are truly violent. They are truly disturbed, and I don't see much hope for some of those youngsters. They're few and far between, but they have to be in the custody and secure setting of a criminal justice system, and many of them are going to remain there for a long time. My other thought and suggestion, that's why I think meetings like this are so important, is that schools cannot do this alone. This is not the school's fault. I mean, and I say that. The school didn't make it this way, okay? They came out of environments into a school where the school was doing its damn best, and one of the few institutions that are doing anything to address this problem. They need the support of a lot of other institutions and a lot of other players, everything from the district attorney to the police department, to the courts, to other community agencies, more particularly the parents and the public as well. Some of those relationships have to be formal, and I think one of the key relationships, and I think you're fortunate in this town because it's already in place, is the relationship between the police department and the schools. I know Chief Doherty. I was sad to see him leave Watertown, but I was happy to see that he stayed in the county. He's an excellent criminal justice professional. The relationship between the department and the school is memorialized here, as it is in many other places, but it's it's not common when you get out of Middlesex County. It's formalized in a written memorandum of understanding. I don't know whether or not you're familiar with it, but it lays out the relationship and the rights and duties and responsibilities of both parties, because I think the key thing is to realize that what happens out in the community or in the streets or in the playgrounds, what happens tonight, over the weekend, next week, and particularly in the summer, is going to spill in to the school the next day or soon thereafter. And if the school doesn't know what that school is dealing with, who the players are, they're left defenseless, because that's exactly what happened in Dartmouth. The school had no idea that this dispute had broken out the weekend before and the night before. And that's not to blame anybody for what happened there. It's just that we have to communicate better to make sure that the information that the police knows gets to the schools and vice versa, not just on issues of violence, but also on issues of drugs and other types of behavior, that both parties should be going in the same direction. You're fortunate here that they are going in the same direction, have been for some time. Other types of relationships can be developed through Project Alliance. Dr. Mayo has been very much involved. Matter of fact, we'll be, I don't know if he's going to make tomorrow morning's superintendent's meeting, but we'll be meeting at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to go over issues of multiculturalism and putting on a conference which is scheduled for the latter part of this month to develop those types of issues that people of different cultures and races come together and learn to live a little bit better and get along a little bit better in environments. But those types of relationships are already present here in Wakefield through Dr. Mayo's involvement with Project Alliance. So those are just a few of the thoughts that I have on this issue. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions at the completion of this. And I wish I shared Judge Kavanaugh's view about weapons, and particularly when it comes to guns. So I don't have a license to carry a gun. But if I did, I would have brought with you, in case anyone doubts what I'm saying, and I would have brought with you the weapons that police departments have taken from any sampling in Middlesex County, and you would see weapons that would shock you. From not only guns, but brass knuckles, knives, other dangerous types of weapons. And if any of you doubt it, I don't think there's a police department of any size in this state or in this country that does not have in its department, in its weapons, and its evidence locker, weapons that have been taken from students or either taken from students or young people from anywhere. Some of these weapons we've taken them have been sixth grade dances, hideous types of weapons that have been taken from children. I think that all of us, whether we be school committee people who put a lot of time and effort into working to improve education, I think we all, district attorneys, police, judges, all of us, owe it to those youngsters to make sure that the weapons that we're seeing with youngsters who are prepared to use them are not a part of the future of the children who are attending schools here in Wakefield throughout the state. So thank you very much.
Thank you, District Attorney Thomas Riley. I'd now like to introduce to all of you here our Police Chief Stephen Doherty, and as District Attorney Riley mentioned, Chief Doherty works very, very closely with the schools. He and the men that he delegates to come to the schools come in and do tell us about what's going on in the community. Not only that, but they come very quickly when we need them. And not only that, they know the kids in town, and that's very, very important. Chief Doherty.
Thank you, Dr. Mayo. Mr. Chairman, members of the school committee, interested citizens, and I think most importantly, parents of children of all ages, those in the public schools and residents of the town who may be in private schools. Thank you for the invitation. I would just like to say that we have, as District Attorney Riley alluded to, Project Alliance, which is a formalization of an agreement between the superintendent of schools and the chief of police as to what we consider important and how we will exchange information, how we will make each other's resources available to one another in order to understand what goes on in the schools, and from my community-wide perspective, what goes on in the community that may impact the schools. This is extremely important that this relationship be full and open. Detective Cass comes to the high school probably pretty close to a daily basis. As I'm sure the townspeople are aware, we've now begun a full-time DARE program, which dedicates a full-time officer in the junior high school level the attitude and emphasis there is more toward education and prevention. And I think the communication between the police and the school people, staff members, administrators at all levels is important, and it's fundamental to solve one issue, and that's fear. Judge Kavanaugh mentioned in his opening remarks that why do young people bring a weapon to school? Well, I needed to protect me from him. Well, who's him? Who's her? Why do you need that protection? Our experience has shown that a lot of times that mental decision that I need protection stems from information communicated through hearsay, information communicated third, fourth, and fifth hand in the grapevine, gossip mill, whatever you want to call it, in an organization that transmits information with the speed of light, with very little accuracy in most cases. These young people, the students, may have suffered a real or imagined injustice in the course of the school day. They may then get with their friends, information may be transmitted, invariably it's inaccurate, but it may cause them to sense fear. If the young student, the person, has the opportunity and the means to obtain a weapon, that environment is going to cause them to perhaps access that opportunity. The only way that I feel the police department can combat that is to work with Dr. Mayo and down through his chain of command in the school department and the school administrators, right down to the individual classroom teachers, to make the police department available to receive information that may impact us in the community. On the other side of the coin, the officers who are in the schools on a fairly regular basis, even the officers who respond to the schools, and they may not have a formalized job description in the school. They are just come here because they've been called, as they may have been sent to anywhere else in the community. The communication has to be available. The information transmittal back and forth has to be available if we're ever to reduce the perception of fear, control as best we can the transmittal of information within the school environment which may cause children, students to be afraid. If we couple that open transmittal of information to reduce rumors when and where they start, to have the staff make announcements, to hold assemblies, especially when you've had a critical incident, one involving a large number of students in an organized fashion, or one involving, tragically, any method or any manner of personal injury. Those type of rumors spread through an educational organization with amazing speed. The staff has to be sensitive to that and then make either the formal representatives of the police department in the school system aware of it, or make me aware of it, or anyone at the police station aware of it, so we can deal with it when the bell rings, and those people who may be carrying a group misconception, wait till school's over, we're gonna do something about this situation. That type of organized behavior impacts on the community. We are now transmitting information back and forth and hopefully being able to reduce the number of incidents where students feel threatened, either from within the school organization or from without. We have to look at the community in its entirety. You have another high school 1,500 yards up the hill, which has a much more urban clientele. That urban clientele brings to Wakefield perhaps some attitudes that wouldn't be found here if everyone who lived here went to one school and had type of a homogeneous approach and a view of life. That urban clientele may come with a different philosophy, but from my perspective, the philosophy of this school and the one of that school, we have to exist on this small piece of real estate where we have two high schools close together. Again, we've established a like relationship with the administration of that high school so that the information transmittal is as open up there, hopefully, as it is here. Part of the formalization of this information transmittal in the hopes that we can reduce fear is that under the Education Reform Act, the legislature has passed and formalized some reporting procedures that are placed in the hands of the superintendents of schools. They've also placed some additional responsibilities and authority in the hands of administrators and principals. This gives the police department a reporting method, and the reporting method is defined such that if there is an incident, a weapons-related incident in the schools, the administration, the superintendent, will transmit that to me. I then add that information to the database that I have, to the intelligence that I have, in order to hopefully better equip me to deal with those things as they create events in the community. And again, as District Attorney Riley said, this is an ebb and flow of information. They're in the school for 8 hours a day. Vacations, nights, weekends, holidays, they may also be moving about in the community. And those type of things we have to be watchful for. What happens in school can affect the community. What happens at a dance can spill over into the downtown area, at a restaurant, at a coffee shop. We've had instances where people have gone away from the school environment, become organized, equipped, and come back to meet at a prearranged time and place to have a meaningful exchange of different ideas, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not so peacefully. These are the type of things that we have to be sensitive to. What I want the community to know is that there are mechanisms in place, both through the education reform and through Project Alliance, that let the police department work and transmit information back and forth in the hopes that we can minimize the environment that makes a student feel that he or she must arm themselves. That helps no one. And I think the best way to do that is to be aware of it in its earliest formative stages, counter those rumors, put out the straight facts as best we know them so that people can make decisions, assemblies, separate students. As District Attorney Riley said, there are clearly some students who just cannot function in the structured environment of an educational institution. There are clearly some individuals who can't function on the streets of Wakefield. It's really no different from a juvenile or young adult to an adult sense. There are some people who are just not equipped to deal with the pressures of society, whether they're in a classroom or whether they're on the street. But I want you to know that we are working together. We are working together with the best information that we have, with the best equipment that we have, in order to minimize those situations and events that could detract from the educational environment. Part of that message is here tonight, the fact that we are here tonight, the fact that Judge Kavanaugh, who sees the people who we have to deal with in a formal sense, whether they be students or otherwise, he then uses his resources, and there is certainly an information transmittal between the police and the courts on a daily basis. Our clientele is dealt with within the law, but there are certainly alternative solutions. As His Honor is trying one from an innovative approach, we are constantly looking at the student. If the student's been involved in something, what is our approach? There's a law enforcement approach, there's an educational approach, there's a judicial approach. And those things are looked at not in any one singular fashion, but looked at together. This individual's needs and concerns versus the other 35 or 25 students that may be in his or her class. So we are working together. We're fully aware of the urban setting, that some students are brought to Wakefield from other communities to the vocational school, and this relationship is not just here, it's in each one of the schools, because we cannot look at it in isolation. But we are working at it, and just to put things in perspective for you, I brought a few numbers. I don't know if anyone may have any misconceptions, but the total police response to both, and I limited my calculations to just the high school and the junior high school. The total police response to both of those schools combined in 1991 was 63 calls. Those 63 calls may have been someone double parked in front of the town meeting, an electrical problem, a burglar alarm. Those 63 calls do not mean that we had an armed or disruptive student. That's the total police response. Without going through each of them and identifying them, I didn't break them down as to what the incident was, but that's a fairly small response. In 1992 and 1993, the police responses in total for every reason were 91 calls for both years for both schools. That's not a tremendous demand for police service in the educational environment. I think a good percentage of those, I would guess around 20%, are probably alarm calls based on answering premise alarms and burglar alarms. So the problem is here. We recognize that it's here. We're doing our best efforts in a joint fashion to deal with it. But I think if you look at those numbers, out of answering roughly 12,000 calls in 1993, we came to both of the major educational institutions 91 times. That's a fairly small percentage of having police officially called to the schools. And I think that's the good news. The other good news is that we're sensitive to this and we're dealing with it. So, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Mayo, that's all I have to offer from the local perspective.
Thank you, Chief Doherty. Mr. Scully, members of the school committee, we have had a planning group for this program. All of our administrators are here, or most of them are here anyway, who planned this program. We also involved high school students. We have Jason out of Mallorca who is here. Richard Cook was also part of the planning team. What I'd like to do now is to ask you if you, the school committee members, have any questions of our guests or our administrators. And through that, I think we'll unfold some other programs that are being initiated in the schools, and then perhaps open it up to our audience. Mr. Scully?
Judge Kavanaugh, when a juvenile comes before you, and I'm not speaking about someone of age, I'm talking about a youngster, accused of either having a weapon or some type of violent crime, how does the justice system, or should I say, does the justice system hold the parents responsible in any way? What is the parents' role in all of this?
Well, first of all, in each case, the parent must attend court with the juvenile. And the answer, I think, varies from case to case, but generally, I don't think the parents are held responsible. And I don't think, my own feeling is that if there was some evidence that the parents knew of the conduct of their children and didn't do anything about it, that would disturb me very much, and then I would take that into. But when a youngster leaves home and has a gun outside the house or a knife tucked away outside, it's evidence that he didn't have it at home and there was no knowledge of the parent. I mean, I don't know how much you expect of parents. I'm not a parent myself, so I don't know how much you expect of parents. They got enough things to bring the child up just morally right and try to do the right thing, but to be with that child at all times and say, okay, he got something planted outside the house or she, I don't know. So the answer probably in the long run is no, is that the parents are probably not, as a rule, saying, well, your son had a gun, your daughter had a knife, you are responsible. It might be that in the other fashion, it might be, well, if you paid a little more attention, you might have seen some signs toward this violent conduct of your child. Pay more attention, maybe. I don't think that everything they do is. I'm like Tom Ryan in some extent. That you just can't. Some don't belong in the school setting, and by the same token, some just don't. Aren't going to respond to parents at home. They're not going to respond to the judges. They're not going to respond to probation officers. So in the long and short of it is, no, the answer is I don't think that as a general rule, parents are held accountable because their child has a gun or a knife. But I want to stir up the pot a little bit here, maybe disagree with Tom on something if I can. I mean, how tough these things are. There's not a better district attorney in Massachusetts or probably in the country than Tom Ryan. He does his job and he does it well, so I almost ran against him once. But I became a judge instead. I knew I couldn't win. But he said he has zero tolerance for people who carry guns and weapons to school. And he does. Except last year there was a case that came before me, and I have zero tolerance. Except that kid is not in jail today. Because everyone in this community, as I start to tell you, everyone in that community, Tom, went to bat for that kid. That wasn't a bad kid. And everyone wanted to make sure he didn't go to jail. So your zero tolerance, your office zero tolerance went, and my zero tolerance went because good people, for good reasons, came to bat for that kid. At least that's how I explain it. So everyone in the case is different. Everybody wants justice, but if it's your kid, justice means something different if it's a neighbor across the street. Your kid shouldn't go to jail. Damn it, every other kid out there who's doing those things, they ought to put them in their 4th grade, block the doors up, except when it's yours. And that was a good example to me about this youngster. He had a gun. Someone saw him with a gun in a school, and they reported him to the administrators who took instant action. The case was brought before, and then before you know it, someone said, we're going to put this kid in jail, not this kid. And I think they were right, to be very frank. So we found ways not to put him in jail. So zero tolerance It means zero tolerance when you want zero tolerance. It means 99% tolerance when you want to be 90. It's 65% when it's... So I don't mean to quarrel with Tom, but all I'm saying is, don't let people misguide you when they say, throw the book at them. Anytime you want to come into my court, not in the juvenile session, you're more than welcome. Sit in the courtroom and say, why did the judge do that? Because every human being out there has a different story. Every person out there has come from a different background. Everyone has different people going to bat for them. I'm not going to bat for them, on the other hand. So when you read about judges being easy, some of us are, and I may be in that cat, I may be a wimp, I don't know. Some of us might be too easy. But you have to ask, what happened in that particular case? What were the dynamics of that case? Not the case in Worcester that you heard about was very similar, but it's not very similar. Not the case you heard about in Gloucester that's almost the same, that almost might make a big difference. So, but I want to just say, as long as I have the floor just for a second, all these things, we're talking about young people here tonight. Well, I'll tell you, they're not looking at great role models. They're not, when they turn on the television, they're not looking at great things on television every day. They see so much violence on television. And one thing, I'm making little notes to myself as we, even in the field of sports, how things have changed. And they say, all right, Kavanaugh's gone whack, he's really dreaming up things. Last year there were more more brawls in baseball than ever before. Baseball used to be, at one point, a gentleman's game. They hardly, if you heard of one brawl or two brawls a season, that was a big deal. Last year there were brawls almost every week. The teams would flow out onto the field, and it was almost a weekly event. That may be insignificant, but to me it's significant. For some reason, it's translating into these athletes. That's how they are showing the kids of this country of ours how they resolve their disputes on the playing field. Guy throws a close one to the inside, cuts the guy down a little bit. What happens next? Pitcher, the batter runs out, hits the pitcher. Next thing you know, all the benches are out. And this happened every year. And I guarantee you something. And I hope I'm wrong. That's going to translate into Little League kids and minor league kids, and it's going to translate this year what they saw on television last year with those kids. Violence is our answer to everything. Why do people on the highways, they get stopped? I had a guy the other day, there were three fellows, young men, adults in their 30s, and they had a brawl with one fellow. And I said, well, I'm sure this was for a very important reason. You three were fighting this one person. I said, I'm sure you wouldn't be stopped out there fighting at three adults, kicking the heck out of each other. I said, I'm sure. What was the reason? One fellow had a 1983 beat-up old Mercedes, he said, and this guy tapped him in the back. I said, well, that makes sense. I understand that. Very important. I mean, that's a real good cause, I said, for brawling. The four of you ought to be ashamed of yourselves. But that's what we do now. And where's it coming from? So adults are showing the way. So we're not just talking about students here. We're talking about our role. What is our role? Well, and there's more violence, and I'm going to end with this, I promise you, for now. We talk about safe streets, safe schools. Let me tell you something. The most unsafe place to be in the city of Medford, the city of Malden, and maybe in the town of Wakefield is at home. More violence is being perpetrated against domestic violence, against spouses, against children, in this community and almost every community. So they're getting at home too. They're getting beaten at home. They're seeing husbands browbeat, and not only browbeat, but physically beat their wives. And this is the answer. We all seem to respond. Maybe I'm too jaundiced in this court now. Maybe I've been there too long. It's time to move on. But we see so much violence. And if your kid is 4 or 5 years old, if he's 10 or 15 years old or 12 years old, and he sees this every single day of his life, what do you expect he's going to do when he's going to use all his own problems? Go to the book and say, well, the book says I should walk away. Walk away when he just saw his father beat the heck out of his mother, when he saw his sister, or his older sister beating up the little sister. You tell me. So it's not just the youngsters. They're getting it somewhere. They don't live in a vacuum. They live with us.
The last couple of years I've attended the school committee conferences down in Hyannis, and I saw the last couple of years, the panel they had on conflict resolution and one that they had on mediation. And they had a panel of high school students come on the mediation area, and I thought that was very, very informative. Of course, it was a school that had multiracial students and more need maybe for different cultures to be aware of their problems. But what I found interesting from both of them is parenting is not an easy job. You can go to to school to be a police officer or a doctor or a lawyer, but no one teaches anyone how to parent. And I think that the more that the community can support parenting, be it through the churches, be it through the police, the schools, I think that parents need a support group, because it's fine to have, get married and want to have a family and have these lovely little babies, but when they start growing up and they start getting to the age where, as you say, they can't handle conflict, well, no one in the home knows how to, they haven't been taught how to address that. And I can go back, I have 4 children of my own, and I can see that this is very normal in every household. And the kids, the conflict resolution panel that I saw was very informative, because if you could start teaching that as early as kindergarten, 1st grade, you know, the kids are out in the schoolyard and they're playing ball, and somebody comes along and takes the ball as it bounces away and runs away, and the first thing you know, they're hitting each other, and then somebody's in the principal's office, and it starts as early as that. And you're right, there's too much on television that falls, you know, that's all the kids see. So I think that one way is through education in setting up things, support groups to help the parents. That's how I see some of it. But these areas are great if we can get them going and get them involved in our schools. Thank you.
Judge Kavanaugh, could you explain just not the whole program, but a little bit more about the teen panel program that you...
It was a concept when I was in the legislature quite a few years ago that I thought of. I saw it somewhere else. I saw it was working in Jacksonville, Florida, maybe in a couple other places around the country. And I filed legislation to see if we could put it into effect here. It varies from place to place, but essentially what it does is take young people into the judicial picture. It helps us make decisions based upon advice. It brings them into, for several, what it does is say to them, we value your opinions. You're young people, we're talking about other young people, tell us what you think we should do to them. It makes them better citizens, I think, by having a role in their government. So the government isn't just the legislature, it's not just the city council, not just the school committee. The government is part of our government. It's the judicial branch. So I think they take part of the government. And I might just parenthetically say, we give all these awards for athletes, and I was an athlete. We give all these great awards. They walk around with the M Club sweaters. And why don't we start thinking about the kids for academic? Give the M Club sweaters for the great academic athletes, who in the long run are going to do much more for us than the kid who can punt the football. But it brings them into the picture and says to them, we value. And what I'm going to do in my court, your court, in the Malden court, is to try to involve juvenile defendants too. Once they've been involved as litigants, I want to ask them, okay, you've been there. You've done wrong, but we still want to know what you would do with others in the same situation. I think it would be a good idea. Some states have it where they actually, jurors, they will determine guilt or innocence, or in juvenile delinquency cases, delinquency or non-delinquency, where they even prosecute the cases. I don't envision that. It's too radical. I mean, at this point, I'm trying to start with baby steps. If I can just have a meeting once or twice a month and go back to this panel and say to them, look, what would you do with a young kid, 13 years old, who was writing graffiti all over Wakefield High saying, and just won't stop doing it? What would you do with that kid? Maybe, I don't know, maybe they give me a better idea than I could think of, because I don't know what to do with them. Maybe if you had a kid who's disorderly in school, disruptive, maybe if some other kid who steals cars all the time, what would you do with them? Maybe if I have a panel, right now we have 2 panels we just set up. One has 11 members, the other has 10. In those 10 or 11 people, someone might come up with something very creative that would be so different that it just might hit home with that juvenile. I'm trying to hit home, and I'm trying to involve people into it, so when they've been through it, they can say, I took part in something that was worthwhile. I took part in making my community a better community. I was a juvenile juror. I was a teen advisor to a judge, to a judicial system, and they valued my opinions. The juvenile goes through the process, says, I was in the process. They took me. Even I was taken. And I was asked my advice. The judge didn't take it, but he asked me, or she. So that's what I'm trying to do. I envision just asking for advice, not having them as jurors, finding delinquency or non-delinquency. The judge will still do that, and I just want to meet with them and get some particular types of crimes after the event.
Could I ask the attorney? District attorney. Promoted, John.
Don't get me in trouble.
No, ask by Attorney General.
God is nervous.
Attorney General.
The long-term,
The DA.
one, could you maybe amplify a little, once again, not without going into it in great depth, the long-term residential program you're referring to, and also if you have any thoughts on some creative ways in which that could be funded through the state? Because there's not a lot of money, as we all know.
See, I don't think you're talking about, really, if the state did it right, I don't think you're talking about a lot of money. Let me put it in perspective. You take a school, some of the schools that I deal with, a school of 1,000 youngsters, you're talking probably, in that school population, maybe 20 or so, less than 20, that are really seriously involved in any real things. Some of them are going to go right into DYS. So maybe you're talking 50 or 60 others. I mean, it's a small, maybe 100 out of that at the most that you're talking. And most of those can be taken care of by services that are existing right now. So you're talking about a small group of youngsters. There's one school right now that without giving you the name of it, we could, and the headmaster and I, we meet every Monday morning with the police department. We could clean that whole place up with about 20 of them. So there's 2,400 in that school. I'm talking about there's plenty of institutions, either schools that have been closed, that can be converted into residential settings where these youngsters are going to be taken away if they don't have a home. And Judge Kavanaugh was absolutely right. Some of these parents are trying, and they're doing the damn best they can, and they still can't cope. They're single parents, they can't control. In many cases, the young boy is the man of the house, and he's a lot bigger than his mother, and he's out of, you really can't control him. Get him into a setting where they have some security without being a real secure setting. A residential setting, there's many of them that I know in Middlesex County that are former county places that have been closed now, could be turned into residential settings where they're provided with an education, provided with some treatment, provided and work on getting their self-esteem back, where they begin to feel a little bit better about themselves. They have organized sports teams and compete with other or in academics, a normal school setting, except that they don't go home, don't go back to the community, they don't go back to drugs, they don't go back to whatever it caused them to get into it. So that's what I'm envisioning. I'm not talking about the Paris Island mentality of having around march all day or do push-ups and do all that. It's got to be more than that if you're going to really give them a real chance. Now, how are they going to fund that? I don't, that's a question of priorities. I'll tell you, I'd find funding for that before I'd find it for that megaplex. And you'd save a lot more kids' lives with that. Whatever they're going to put into that, it would be a token as to what it would take to do this statewide, if the state took control of it. If they could find money for megaplex, they could find money for this. And in the long run, what does it cost? I think estimates are $25,000, $30,000 a year to put a child in, to put somebody in prison cell and maintain it. So what would this cost? $10,000? I don't know what it would cost. If you can invest that money early on and keep that kid away from prison, look how much money you spend. And the answer isn't just building more prison cells. I think the answer is building some alternatives that are going to make a difference. For some of them, I'm not naive enough to think that you can solve all these problems. But some of these kids, you can, through a combination of techniques, you can turn them around and they can go on to productive lives. I'm absolutely convinced of that. But going to where they're going, in the communities that they're in the homes that they're in, and Judge Kavanaugh's right, there's violence, there's everything going on in that home. You can't turn that kid around when he's in that home. When he's going home there and seeing that every night. You can't do it.
You had mentioned that, I forget what one of you had mentioned, I forget which one, about really having, I don't know if you put it in these words, but really as a community or as a society having the will mustering, putting together the will to address the problem. And I would tend to agree with that. I think any big problem we have to face in a society, the only way we end up addressing it successfully is when we muster the will. Have you got any thoughts on how we can muster people's will, so to speak, to address the issue?
I think with some set policies that are very clear, there's certain things that are very right and other things that are very wrong. And we shouldn't be, as adults or policymakers or administrators or whatever capacity we're in, we shouldn't be confused about that. Is it wrong to take a weapon to school? Yeah, it is. Do you have any business bringing weapons to school? No, you don't. And something's got to happen to you. And does it have to be expulsion for every case? No, it doesn't. It has to be a reason. And the judge was absolutely right. There was a case of a youngster that had a weapon in a school, and he was absolutely right in terms of zero tolerance. And it was a decision that I had to make, whether it was a mandatory year under the statute. And if I went ahead and enforced that, then he was going to go to jail for a year. It's one of the good things I think that we have going. It didn't happen in this community, but it happened in a neighboring community because we were all talking together. The police were talking to the schools were talking to me. We met, and it took me a long while to get me to that point, but I backed off that point. But there were consequences to this youngster. He didn't just, walk free. He was transferred. There was some very extensive probationary periods, community service time. So there were some consequences to those actions. But going back to your question, I think some very set rules regarding behavior, regarding weapons, regarding drugs, and then they have to be enforced. And we can, this is not an impossible. We're not talking about whatever your total numbers of students here. Almost all of them are good kids, and it's focusing upon the problems and then doing something about it. Let me give you an example. One thing that we've done without going into it. In one of our communities with this community-based prosecution, we started, and it was out of control. We had a period, it was various gangs fighting over a race over turf. In one period of time, 2 years ago, on the city's playgrounds that summer, there were 14 stabbings in 13 days. Okay, and we had meetings, and we got organized. And we started to focus and target the youngsters who were responsible for it and do something about it. Get them out of the community, you get them tied up with probation or something like that. And we monitored those. Now that list now, and we've stayed at it now for 2 years later, that list is, our list is going down, it's not going up. So something's working when you're holding people accountable and you're telling, the worst thing you can do to a kid was engage that kind of behaviors to do nothing. Because then what kind of a message are you sending? Okay, it doesn't mean they all go to jail, but something happens to them. And we went at them very hard and very aggressively, and what's happening, the numbers are coming down. So it's not, something can't be done now. It can't be done in the history of any of the urban cities in this country who have ignored this problem. It's gotten worse. You don't have to go any further than Boston to look at that. So you jump on it quick, you do something about it, you can resolve it. One last example, and then I'll stop. We had a group of 6. They were all about 14 years of age. And they had done violent assaults. And it was just starting. And they were in 9th grade, I guess, whatever it was, somewhere in there. And we jumped all over. They were arrested. They were treated very seriously. They were put on very strict probation. They were monitored. They've been monitored for the last 3 years. Well, I guess they were sorry, because every one of those kids, we haven't had a peep out of them since then. Because they know this system's got some teeth, and if they go back before this judge or the judge before them, something's going to happen to them. And then what do? They act in their self-interest. They behave.
If I could follow up, Bill. The only reason,
I know that we can all hear each other without the mics, but the TV camera folks, they can't hold. I can follow up. Mr. Riley, you mentioned youth advocates, especially in use of mediation and conflict resolution. So many incidences here at the high school and other schools are the result of rumors, misinformation, and it all takes on a life of its own. Well, most of the time, before administrators and teachers really know what's going on, this is taking place. I think it would be very important to train students within the school to be able to identify this, to be able to know what to do, and to assist them in breaking down the rumor and breaking down this misinformation. I know in this school we have a peer leadership program. I think this is one area that we should be able to do that. But sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes because of a life of its own, it takes on a different meaning. And sometimes within the school population, sometimes with their parents. And people have to have a mechanism, I think, to be able to communicate, whether it be with the principal, the guidance, or whatever it might be, without fear of retribution, without knowledge, the old drop a dime routine, that we can tip it off. But an awful lot of, I think, the possible solutions come from potentially training the students themselves to be part of the solution with their schoolmates. Another thing is that we've been faced with in the past year is that occasionally we have students who are expelled here for weapons activities, for violence, for fighting, and so forth. And the next thing you know, these individuals are at another high school. And I think we're all in a little bit of quandary about what to do with that. And we don't necessarily want to take that student and say, okay, you're on your own. You're out of school totally and completely. But I really think there has to be a lot of guidelines, a lot of help, assistance, and backup, and a probation right off the bat from any individual who is thrown out of a particular school system and placed in another school. I'm not necessarily asking questions, I'm just relaying some of the instances and feelings that I have about this. Having two children go through the high school, another daughter in the high school now, another boy next year, they come home with a little bit of fear. My 16-year-old daughter comes back home with a lot more concerns than my children who were 21 and 22 that graduated from the school. So I think if we could come up with programs within to make them part of the solution, but also to have an ability to communicate to administration and to the police dangerous potential activities, I think we might be able to assist the process. I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments about that to any of you in the panel.
I just have one. I have one response. My experience has been that children want to go to school in safety and want to go to learn and develop and have fun. They know who the people are, and those youngsters are, who are out of control. And they also know who the students are that have weapons. And when they see that we as either adults don't do anything about it, why would they ever come forward? Where there is a trusting relationship with the school, they will tell who the students are that have the weapons, as long as something is done about it. When something is not done about it, then they will not come forward. And I think that's the key to it. If the school, if there's clear rules and those rules are enforced, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a sign when you walk into that school and the first assembly in 9th grade or whatever it is, either weapons or whatever it is, the policies explained, and those students know. And then when something is done that violates those policies, something is done about it, and there are consequences, and the students support that. We have a situation in one of the neighboring communities, and there was a school function. We have a police officer who was there on almost a permanent basis and knows those students. He walked into an academic assembly for awards for the type of thing that Judge Kavanaugh was talking about, and there was a standing ovation from those kids because they knew he was there to help them, and they were getting the type of help that they want and they deserve. So I think everything you said was on point. The students have to have some place to go to make sure that something happens.
I would like to ask if anybody in the audience tonight has any questions that they would like to ask of the panel. See Mr. Barsanti? You can yell it out from the event if you like.
If I may, first and foremost, I would like to applaud Judge Kavanaugh for his comments, because I think his comments are right on line, and I think almost all of us recognize that. I mean, the basic concept is that violence begets violence, and whether it starts out in a home surrounding, you see it going into second and third generation situations. And of course, it is true that we have enhanced the use of violence as a solution to all sorts of problems. And, you know, I can remember growing up and we had a Richard Widmark who knocked a woman down a flight of stairs and we were all shocked. But that Richard Widmark character was considered as psychotic. Now we have a Rambo who knocks people all over the place and he's considered as a hero. And that's one of the differences in our culture, unfortunately. I think, I do not have a question to the panel, however, I do thank the school committee and Mr. Mayo for bringing the panel together. However, I do have a comment for the school committee, and that is, I think there are situations, many situations at times, when our administrators should maybe make a comment to a parent as a child is being evaluated, core evaluated, and things like that, when it's obvious that the child's problems, they aren't developed in a vacuum. More often than not, the child's problems come from the parents. However, I think all too often, our administrators, and I'm not trying to pick out any one person here, and I may not even be talking about our school system, but I think all too often our administrators are conscious of the fact that they have to tread lightly when they're dealing with a parent. I think that the school committee should be more than willing in any situation to try to back up the administrators when they are dealing with a parent. And I'm not talking about a situation, but I do feel very strongly that all too often, and we all recognize the fact, that a child's problems are merely more often than not a reflection of that which is transpired in the home. And maybe, just maybe, sometimes, in a nice manner, our administrators could say something and make a parent fully recognize that, hey, but maybe you are screwing up and maybe you need the help more than the child does. And I don't think that happens as often as it should. And that's my only comment.
Anybody else have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Patty Dorn. I just have a question. Everybody touched on raising the self-esteem of the students to keep them out of trouble. And I know with budget cuts and stuff that's hard, and maybe we should look through some kind of creative financing to keep funding these extra activities for our kids to keep them involved and raise their self-esteem. And I just have one question. How many kids who come before you, Judge Kavanaugh and D.A. Riley, are involved in band or junior achievement or DECA?
I don't know, but not a heck of a lot. I just took a survey recently on how many can read. Literacy is a big deal. A lot of crime is committed. I don't even come close to home. I have someone in my family, not a criminal. We don't think.
We all have some.
Well, not too sure. We have I'll tell you something. So I'm using my own family. This is,
Your family, Willie.
that's right. Well, it happens to everyone's family. So I'll use my own. Now, this kid hasn't had a job. He didn't have a job when he was growing up. He's about 23, 24 now. And I used to say to him, will you please get a job? And one day I said to him, Ron, why don't you go over to United Parcel? They may be hiring. So he came back, he said, I saw him later that day, he said, did you go to United Parcel? Yeah, I did. I said, which one did you go to? He said, I went over by North Station. I didn't think it was United Parcel. All I knew was somewhere in Watertown, and in Cambridge there was United. So I said to him, well, good for you. I didn't, don't know me later. I said, I called. I said, come over here. There's no such thing. In this, we used to have battles. I'm just the outsider, you know, it's not my child, it's a child of a relative of mine, this went on, so one day my sister-in-law said to me, don't you understand, he doesn't know how to read? He can't fill out the application. And I was embarrassed. I should have known that because he was dyslexic, he had a lot of problems in special school, but he couldn't fill out an application. So as a result of that, he was embarrassed, he wouldn't go, couldn't get hired for a job. It was a good lesson to me. It was a real good lesson because you think it happens everywhere else except home, it happens in your own home. He's doing a lot better now, but that's a problem. So there are so many things out there. How many kids are in the band? I don't know. How many can't read? The reading levels were a little bit better than I thought they would be though. But I'm going to start assigning kids alternative sentencing. You get a GED, or you go to school and you finish, you come back and you read something to me. You read a couple paragraphs on the book that I'll pick out, or something, and we'll dismiss these charges, because they're probably trivial to begin with. But reading, I think, is got a lot, much more than I ever anticipated. You see a lot of kids who can't read. And that message of my own family, I'll tell you, it was a very telling experience. My sister-in-law said he can't read, how do you expect him to go over there alone and fill out an application for one?
Yes.
Mrs. Joran touched on the question that I had written down. I'll just speak up. That's okay.
Well, we get it for the TV.
Certainly, my questions was, the students who are athletes and in the upper level of scholastic achievement, the students who get into violent situations. And you answered my question by saying, I believe you did, by saying that those are not the majority of students that you run into. The second part of my question was, is it the average student or the underachiever? And you've also answered that. Now, those children are already labeled, and they've been labeled from first grade. Preschool, probably. When these children get into a situation in the upper grades, be it, I'm not talking about carrying weapons into school. I'm just talking about problems that involve discipline. These children have to be treated as fairly, and they have to receive the same breaks as that student who was a good kid and everybody came to bat for. Because these children have already reached their low point before they've even started. And these are the majority of children that we are talking about. So we, as a school system, I don't mean Wakefield, I mean the state of Massachusetts, the country, are failing these children. So we are failing a majority of the students in the system, be it society, which touches them all, which touches us. Our values have been lowered because we have accepted the trash that's on television, and we have accepted the trash that's in the movies. As parents, we have allowed this cancer to come into our homes and infect our children. So therefore, we are responsible for this. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think that when
Good,
you
you're
have...
like I am now.
Pardon?
You ain't getting me like me. We
Well, I
don't.
didn't know what the answer was before. But now you made me lose my train of thought, which isn't hard to do. I really did lose it. But whatever it was good. No, I think that if these
So
children...
society feeling these children, you say?
I feel as though if these children are not treated fairly in the system, if they're in with a group of kids and one of them is Joe Blow's uncle knows your brother, and that child is punished and the rest of them are not punished, they've done a great disservice to their child also. No, I don't mean it You know what I'm saying. There are people, well, let's face it, there are people, you're dealing with human beings. There are people who have a little more sympathy for some people than others, who get into trouble. And if that underachiever, or that child who has a poor self-image, gets taken down the path, and the rest of them don't, it only propagates that same problem. And what I guess I'm really saying is everybody should be treated fairly and equitably in the system, regardless of who it is. And I think that's what I wanted to say. I think that's all I wanted to say for the time being anyway, until they put the heat on in here. I think they have the air conditioning on.
I'm just going to entertain a few more questions, and I would like to explain that the only time we use this is during the summer when we use the air conditioning.
And they haven't pushed the switch.
Joanne and Gil and Mr. Moore, that I think will bring us to an end, okay?
We're all our panel members, but Mr. Riley, I was pleased to hear you mention that you believe that education about this should begin in the younger grades, in kindergarten, because too often things are ignored, and then students show up at the high school, and then we're so quick to blame the high school teachers and administrators for problems that really have been cooking since kindergarten or 1 or 2. My question is, though, do you know of any formal programs that are available with regard to resolution conflict or things of that nature? Because once again, here now is another responsibility that we're asking of our teachers without any formal training, that just, flying on a wing and a prayer. I believe very strongly that we need to educate them if they're going to deal with those problems, but I don't know of any programs that are available to give instruction in that area.
There are programs that are going to be available. One of the things that we're going to be deciding tomorrow morning with Project Alliance is we will probably, in either March or April, be putting on a countywide conference to have administrators and educators from all over the county come and be exposed to those. So there are programs that are up to date on that. In terms, I don't know the particulars of that, but there are programs. We're going to be bringing. What we do is we'll bring in someone who's an expert in this, and then expose various options for school administrators throughout the county. So that's one of the decisions we have to make tomorrow. But we will do it as part. We do it on. Everything is diverse violence prevention to drug and alcohol prevention to suicide, teenage suicide prevention, dating violence. But this is what you're talking about. There's tremendous need out there, and we are going to be putting on a conference that everyone will be exposed to. And Dr. Mayo's been very much involved. I'm sure there's been very good attendance from this school system at the conferences that we have. We just did one on sexual harassment, and it was very well attended. So they're in touch with what we're doing.
Yes.
Chief, just to follow up on a comment that Mr. Scully made, you mentioned communication and getting about the grapevine or whatever you choose to call it. The truth is that quite often it's the students that really know who's got the gun, who started the fight, even before the administrators. But as Mr. Scully mentioned, they're afraid to come forward with that information. Do we have a system in place, or what advice could you give to a student that has that information but is uncomfortable coming forward publicly? What do you tell a student about getting that information known without putting themselves in jeopardy?
Getting it known to the school administrative hierarchy or to the police?
Whichever is appropriate, whichever they're more comfortable with, or can they go to both?
Well, certainly they can go to both, and I think they should, only because dual notification is better than single, if certainly better than none.
Let me ask you a question. Do you act upon an anonymous phone call?
Yes. In other words, we have an anonymous telephone line. The Detective Division has had for some time a tip line, if you will, basically for criminal activity. And that's nothing more than a phone that's answered when the person is physically near the instrument, or answered by an answering machine if it's obviously after hours or otherwise. But yes, that information is acted upon, but you really have, I can't tell you how it's acted upon until you tell me what the information is. The level of response is clearly going to be dictated by the content of the message. But we have had that in place for a number of years. And if the student wants to initiate some sort of notification within the hierarchy of the school department, I would suggest that they go to a person whom they trust, an adult whom they trust, even if it's not their own teacher. They may have some existing relationship, a teacher that they liked best from a previous year, etc. And to make a dual notification, but certainly to tell someone. We've made ourselves available in the school environment. We've made ourselves available in the community and strive to do that in ever-increasing fashion through a number of venues. But if the student is concerned about it and they want to remain anonymous, they certainly can report that to us. And I think they should report it through the school management at whatever level and to the police. They can call the front desk anonymously. Again, this is the type of situation where we cannot use our resources in an open townwide fashion to be a consultant as to whether this is valid or invalid and to get into a rumor control situation at the police desk. However, that's the kind of situation where we want to advise the school administrators where they can get a captive audience of 100 or 200 or 300 or 400 and send the same message to everyone. There may be varying levels of belief or disbelief depending on the rumor. The idea is for us to use our most effective transmittal device, the school people, the assembly, the public address system, to use this environment to dispel and quash and minimize the rumors that may lead people to be in fear or to take some action that is totally unwarranted based on some information that is totally inaccurate. But yes, we do receive that information, and I believe the schools receive it as well. We have solved and I believe diffused a number of incidents. Some of them had the potential to be very serious, and they involved weapons in the recent past. Some of those students were sent to see Judge Kavanaugh. Some of them were not. Some of them were dealt with in-house through the school administrators. But there again, I can't give you a response scenario until we have a set of facts and circumstances. But yes, we do answer and are sensitive to those type of concerns. The students should feel encouraged to do that.
Thank you.
I've listened with care to the talk that was really the three of you seem to click on this mandatory sentencing and truth in sentencing that you read about in the papers, i.e. the Bartley-Fox gun control law. As I recall, years ago there was a school committee person in the city of Boston, go nameless, whose son was stopped and there was a gun in the car. There was a gun in the back seat of the car. And it wasn't considered, Bartley-Fox bill's in effect here. We can't send them away for a year, so they changed it to a dangerous weapon. So there's no mandatory anything that's going to work in this environment of where people get involved. I mean, the system, good kid, bad kid, rich kid, poor kid, every fact is different. So that's why I was encouraged to hear Judge Kavanaugh talk about alternative sentencing. Let the judges be the people who decide what sentences to be applied. But I would like to say one thing on guns. I mean, knives we can't do much about, brass knuckles, but guns, there is something you can do. And I was just thinking, if you had two alternative sentences, one mild, all right, community service, et cetera, and the other one harsh, bordering on maybe a short-term prison sentence. If the child whose gun, the kid who brought the gun into school, does not assist the prosecutor or the police in apprehending the person who sold them the gun, they get alternative 2. All right? If they do help, they get the milder alternative, number 1. And if the kid got the gun out of his father's house, the father gets an alternative. In other words, you got to stop it at the source. And you can't stop all the guns, but boy, every time a kid gets arrested with a gun, that leaves me to believe there's another crime before that, the one who sold it to him. So I'd just like your comment on that.
You're too old for the teen panel.
Just sure. But that's the type of thing that's the type of thing that I would like to hear. I mean, I never thought of that myself. But not that it would be necessarily implemented tomorrow morning, but it's something to think about. It really is. I mean, alternative A and alternative B. You cooperate and you tell us where you got the gun, or you give And we do things like that, not necessarily that cut and dry, but that's a good suggestion. That's what I'm trying to get out of these kids. You know, I like to ask, are these kids here, they have any questions about what, no? All right? Okay.
They're running the machines up there,
They're too busy working,
concentrating on.
One follow-up for BA. Your alternative live-in reform school, we used to call it reform school, that's not politically correct, all right? But that's what it is, all right? How you get the funds for that is you ask government of the world to give up this $200 million tax decrease. Because there's that kind of money floating around. That's it. Right.
I have a couple of comments. I find it a little bit ironic, perhaps, and probably appropriate that we're discussing this whole issue around the anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's birth. And, he was a man who was a great believer in nonviolent means of resolving your conflicts. I think a lot of this goes down to the values we have. A great deal comes from all of us. I think something that Mr. Riley said, and I heard his talk at the Common Core of Learning hearings the other day at the State House, and I was very impressed. Was his emphasis, one aspect was his emphasis on education, starting at the earliest grades. And I think making nonviolence and conflict resolution as part of the curriculum, I think something that is, as I'm a member of a school council and as school committee people and as educators, that's the real key there for us is working on those particular aspects, trying to develop programs where we can inculcate some new values into people about nonviolence and resolution of conflict without violence. When we talk about the values we have, we talk about a lot about resolving these things through nonviolence. We're still a culture that's essentially based on a lot of on resolving our conflicts still in a lot of violent ways. I'm going to make an admission tonight that I'd be denigrated for making at some other time. They may still be denigrated for making, but in my own household, I have very strong values about nonviolence and use of weapons. Back during the Vietnam War period, I was a conscientious objector. And I have a great deal of problems with kind of values that we inculcate into our children, both through the media, even some of the role models we exhibit in our educational system. I see a lot more popular models, role models being used in the classroom as people to look up to. And they don't always give us they're not always examples of the right way to resolve all of our conflicts. Until we become serious as a culture, as an educational system, about the idea that nonviolence and conflict resolution is the best way to go. In other words, that we do it, we don't just talk the talk, but we walk the walk. We're not going to resolve this problem. I think that comes through education. The thing that worries me the most today is not so much that violence hasn't always existed in schools. I remember a lot of rough kids when I was growing up. I remember fights. I remember kids who got expelled for a lot of bad problems. Even in Wakefield, I went to the school system here. Those kids still existed. There's always that small core. But what I see nowadays is a wider core, perhaps you can verify or not, a wider group of kids at risk. Kids we never would have thought of being at risk before. And it has a lot has to do with the fear issue, but a lot has to do with the role models they have for the resolution of conflict. And I look at my own son who's in the 3rd grade. I think of this in the 3rd grade. It's, from all the things he sees going on, I have the hardest time trying to tell my son that sometimes the best solution to a conflict is to walk away. It's to walk away, and it's the simplest thing when you think about it on the one hand to do, but because of all the pressures that we have as children and adults and everything else, that's probably one of the most difficult things we have to do, because of all the ways you're labeled when you turn around and walk away from conflict. Until we become committed to backing up people who are willing to walk away from the fight, walk away from the violence, we're not going to resolve a lot of these problems. I feel very strongly about that. My question to you as school committee people and to the educators and to you as people involved in law enforcement is, where are these programs? How can we get some programs to start at the earliest education levels? I'd like to see some ideas coming of how we can get right at the root, which is when the child is the youngest and most impressionable, and get to them then and press upon these ideas. I've heard a lot of talk tonight about what we do when they get into the high school years, but we've got to do more at an earlier age. One other thing on a little bit different level here, and I think it has to do with the safety issues. I have not heard too much tonight about what I think a lot of young children see as fears about violence coming from outside of the school environment into the school environment. I see that as incursion by adults who don't belong in the school environment, especially in elementary schools, who do things to children, or how children perceive these activities going on through the news media. I'm just wondering if there's any reaction to those kinds of things, or the violence that sometimes comes into the school from outside of the school environment. We talked a lot about the violent reactions that are going on inside the school with the students, but what about some of this violence that comes from outside of the schools into the schools? There's a safety and a security issue going on there that I think is much on the mind of a lot of students and a lot of parents. You know, there's two issues, and that's the other one I haven't heard too much about tonight.
I think those are questions that we probably could sit here for many hours and talk about the strangers that stalk our children today in our society. Our children are not even safe walking to school. They're at risk from the time they leave their homes today. We spend a lot of time here tonight, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, in the audience, I hope at home, talking about programs to neutralize influences that are on our children as we grow up. I had an opportunity this past year to be in Europe with one of my children, and I noticed they have an MTV over here. All of the American stars totally different videos. No violence, no sex. They have no American TV programs in Europe that stress violence. They control from their governments the information that is given to these children. We don't. And in return, we spend all of our time trying to neutralize these influences that these children are in, because that's where it's coming from today, quite frankly. But I would like to thank Dr. Mayo, District Attorney Riley, Judge Kavanaugh, and Chief Doran. This has been a great opportunity to have forums. We need to have more dialogue in our community. We as a school committee need to bring together these different people. These are the issues that we have to be concerned about in order to support our school system. Again, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. I hope we can share some additional dialogue with the future.